I'm Morwenna Stewart. I'm awesomely autistic and ADHD. I'm also founder and coach at yourwritingpartner.co.uk. Follow us for writing tips on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok. That's it. You're listening to the podcast Neuro Lit, where we celebrate neurodivergent writers, artists, and creatives. Today we are talking with the very lovely Michael Barton. Michael is the author of 3 outstanding books on autism and neurodiversity. He's a talented speaker across the globe, and here on this side of the pond on the BBC, Channel 4, New Scientist magazine, TEDx, and many more, I'm sure. Michael's a patron of the charity Casper, a social hub for young autistic people. He's also into judo, he's a musician, he does rock climbing, and one of my favourites, he's a Monty Python fan. That's very cool. Michael has a physics degree and he works in data analysis. So a huge welcome to you, Michael. Hooray! Welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
Really good to talk to you. Oh, it's lovely. Thank you so much for your time today. So yeah, let's kick off. So what was it? You've written 3 books now. What was it that made you want to write books? What started you?
Well, so I'll start with my first book. It's Raining Cats and Dogs. The idea for that came about when I was in junior school, so 7 years old. And even though my language skills are caught up to that's expected for a 7-year-old, because of my very literal way of thinking, which is very common for autistic people, this didn't sit well with the fact that people use idioms and expressions and metaphors in everyday language, often without thinking about the literal interpretation of these sayings. So this would have just confused me as a child. So a strategy that we came up with, my support assistant, was to have an exercise book. I'd write down the confusing phrase or expression, draw a picture of the first thing that came to my mind, and then my support system would write what it actually meant below. So with raining cats and dogs, for example, you don't literally have cats and dogs falling out the sky.
No.
Even though, if you look into the origin of the expressions, cats and dogs would literally jump off roofs when it started raining, because
Oh
they used to
wow.
sunbathe on top of like roofs when we had mud huts, and as soon as it started raining, they all jumped off the roof.
Oh wow. Is that where it came from originally?
That's where the expression came from. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that because I do wonder with those phrases. Some of them are so bizarre that you think,
Mm,
where the hell did that come from? So
mm.
that's really interesting. I wonder if there's another edition of your book in there that kind of gives the history of the sayings, but don't want to write your books for you. So brilliant. Tell me more. What else about what got you into writing books?
So this idea said it not only helped me to understand the expressions, I could learn this means that, that means that. I say I've got a mind kind of like a database. I can just absorb information, especially factual information, more quickly than most people. So he found that not only did it help me to understand the intricacies of the English language, it was helpful for other people around me, so my teachers and my family and friends, to understand how the autistic mind works and to appreciate that this one of the key aspects to being autistic as a child, so our literal thinking, that's just removing one of the barriers to help, well, understand me and help me find my place in the world that much better. So moving on to the writing part,
Mm.
as a teenager, I wrote a column in my Autistic Trust's local newsletter. So just as I said, they're an autistic trust charity providing local services in the Bromley area where I grew up in southeast London. And I had a column as me, a young autistic person, just writing a bit about what it's like to be autistic and some examples of my pictures, which became quite popular actually. So it's combining these 2 ideas, using it as an educational tool, combined with the fact that I wrote this just 1-page article once a month or so for a number of years actually. Then people came to me suggesting the idea of a book. So that's the idea behind It's Raining Cats and Dogs. And we've got all a selection, a wide variety of pictures, obviously not all of them, because I mean, the Oxford English Dictionary of Idioms itself is about that thick.
Yeah.
Add
Yeah.
pictures and you're at least double that.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see
Brilliant.
your shorter Oxford dictionaries are still pretty substantial.
They are, I know, so-called shorter. Well, I think the real full Oxford is something like 10 volumes or something. So that is
Mm,
shorter when you compare
mm,
it to the main ones. But
mm,
yeah,
mm.
wow. So it sort of started off with a column in a newsletter or
Yeah, that's
something
right.
like that. Okay, brilliant, brilliant. And people loved it
Mm,
and wanted to know more and
mm,
suggested it to you.
mm.
Excellent. And what was it that made you think, yes, I can do this. I can do this book? Because it must have been a bit of a daunting thing to do.
I guess in a sense, but I mean, as an optimistic autistic
Mm.
person, I'm not really a person that sees barriers in that same
Yep.
sense. I mean, obviously, it's not a smooth journey by any means. But instead of seeing a barrier like, oh no, I can't do this, I think, okay, this has happened. How can I work around it? Do I just step around the side? Do I learn parkour and flip over the top?
You parkour your way around it. Yeah. Using a metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
people use metaphors as if to like make conversation more interesting, but certainly as an autistic child, that almost has a opposite effect. I'm thinking about someone doing a front flip over a fence rather than thinking about the actual point that's being made.
Yeah. I think you're so right. And I mean, I was thinking of examples when I was joining today of
Mm,
ones I've come across. And I mean, I literally think whenever I see the word abundance, I always think of a bun dance and a bun dancing. So there's a little
mm,
muffin or something dancing. So I
mm,
think there's something in our minds that's so literal that we
mm,
just see that's the
mm,
first thing we see and we
mm.
don't think of the kind of literal meaning, the real
It's as
meaning.
if for neurotypical people, so I
Mm,
mean that as people that are not autistic, you just learn that this expression means that, and you quickly form a shortcut between the two. But because
exactly.
autistic people take each word, process the meaning of it, then put the words together, it's
Yep.
much more difficult to make that shortcut between an entire phrase and its
Yeah.
meaning, and not use our instinct to look at the individual words and piece them together.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that must have had such a wide-ranging impact on
Mm,
all sorts of things, like diagnosis. And I know when I've been in
mm,
diagnostic processes, when people
mm,
use those phrases, like there was one in the book that I saw today, um, take a seat. And I know I've had people say that to me, and I think, well, where do you
mm,
want me to take it? Out the door and
mm.
around the down the street? I literally think of it in that way. So brilliant. So what did you do? I mean, you went through a traditional publisher. How did that all work?
So the way it first came about, I went down the self-publishing route just to see if the book has potential. So it's one thing to it was a black and white It's Raining Cats and Dogs with still a good selection of pictures in there, but just sharing it with like friends and family and stuff, keeping it on a local scale. Because also doing it by yourself, well, you keep more of the money as well. Because
Yep.
obviously publishers do their bit, they take their cut. That's how they operate. So I self-published so that I could, well, keep more of the money for myself. But what really changed things was when I first went to the autism show. So one of the largest autism specific events in the UK, if not the largest,
Yep.
where they get thousands of people at the Excel in London, at the NEC in Birmingham, and so it used to be Event City in Manchester as well. So taking It's Raining Cats and Dogs along to that and giving a talk at the Hub Theatre One, which is essentially a stage exclusively for autistic people, which I think is certainly one of their unique selling points. And I I sold every copy that I had,
Wow.
literally almost
Fantastic.
every single copy.
Yeah.
And we just thought, yes, there's definitely a market out there. That was the moment when
Yeah.
I thought we've got to get it published and then send it out so that anyone can read it
Mm,
anywhere. So it's not just me going to a printers, getting the books printed and getting
mm,
my own ISBNs and doing all of that other stuff. It needed to upscale, which is when I first approached. Yeah, that was when I first approached Jessica Kingsley Publishers, who published my first two books. And they were helpful because they made a couple of amendments to it. Firstly, they made the book a bit longer, so I have a few more pictures. Secondly, they had a color cover because they said a black and white book won't sell in the States.
yep.
And thirdly, they tried to split the idioms up into kind of chapters or kind of grouping them together. So it's not just one long list of over 50 idioms. It's have these idioms like this, like classic idioms or metaphors or everyday expressions, just to help split the book out and make it read that much more nicely. It was a good discussion to help enhance the book. Yeah, I mean, the results speak for themselves.
Absolutely. And what, what's it been like? What's the sort of feedback that you've had?
I mean, I've had, yeah, very positive feedback from It's Raining Cats and Dogs. I think the reason why it is as popular as it is, it's because it focuses on a key aspect of being autistic, our literal way of thinking, which I think pretty much every autistic person has to some extent. You
Yeah.
mentioned it was actually part of the diagnostic testing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is. I don't know. I don't know for sure, so I'm not a diagnostician, and I should probably give that
Yeah.
kind of that caveat. But I think
Mm.
I think it is, isn't it? Because it's a communication
Mm.
uh, issue, and that is one
Yeah.
of the things that we communicate and we interpret things differently, process things
Mm.
differently. So that's definitely part of the criteria. Fantastic. So you had a lot of success with the first book, and then
Mhm.
what happened? What happened next? You got two more in the out there as well.
So, yeah, absolutely. So I went to university, as in I think my second year at university when It's Raining Cats and Dogs was officially published. As I said, it was self-published before. And while I was at university, obviously the idea for a second book came about. So that's where the idea of A Different Kettle of Fish came about, in which I talk about essentially a day in the life of being autistic, because certainly when it was first published back in 2014, there weren't nearly as many first-hand accounts of being autistic as there are today.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it describes the journey I take from my comfort zone at university into the hustle and bustle of central London for the day, bearing in mind that I grew up in London, so I am somewhat used to it, but it's still stretching my comfort zone nonetheless.
Yeah.
So yeah, just take a day to describe what it's like to be autistic, how I see things and how I perceive the world. And yeah,
Mm.
there's some more illustrations and drawings, which are surprisingly popular, even though my
Mm.
artwork hasn't progressed that much since I was 7 years old.
Well, I think it's very cool. I love your artwork. I think it's really nice.
Thank you.
So yeah, it sounds like you kind of had two different formats. One was a kind of a
Mm,
particular topic, and then
mm,
another one was, as you say, a day in a life kind of
mm.
thing. And then there's book three, which has come out last year. Is that right?
Which came out
Yeah.
last year. That's absolutely right. That
Mm.
definitely took the longest to write out of all the books, because one thing I've been thinking about for a number of years is that you don't need to be diagnosed as autistic in order to be autistic. If
Yeah.
an adult is diagnosed, they don't become autistic. We just realize at that point they have been autistic for their entire lives. As I said, being an optimistic person, looking on the bright side of life, that doesn't mean I'm completely diurnal. I still am awake and do things at night too.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Mm.
so it's just extrapolating my optimism and positive way of thinking, liking to look at the strengths of being autistic, which I
Yes.
focus on for my talks that I give to schools, companies, anyone that's willing to pay me to listen to me talk. But yeah, also said extrapolating those traits, such as our logical way of thinking, our attention to detail, often our determination and out of the box way of thinking, among numerous others as well, are
Yep.
traits that have been shown by famous, successful people in the past and the present, and there probably will be more going on in the future as well. So, what I've done, I've taken 18 famous people, going all the way back to Isaac Newton, but also taking people like Mary Curie, the scientist who came up with polonium,
Yep.
Satoshi Tajiri, the man who invented Pokemon, which I'm sure
Mm.
every kid, even though he's not
Every
really
kid
a
knows.
household, every
Yeah,
kid knows Pokemon, but he's not as much of a household name. He's not a celebrity in the
that's
sense that
true.
you would imagine. He keeps himself to
He does.
himself.
Yeah.
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 And even
Mm.
going to the present day, look at the impact that Greta Thunberg has and continue to has. I mean, the world would certainly be a different place in the future if it weren't for her forcing governments
Yeah.
around the world to act upon climate change.
Absolutely. She's amazing, amazing young
Mm,
woman. So yeah, and I was really interested to read some of the. I
mm,
haven't read all of them, but I've read some of the snapshots of people,
mm,
and there do seem to be kind of threads of similar experience, that people
mm,
who just seem to sort of say, no, I'm not happy about this, I'm going to do something different, or
mm,
I don't believe what I'm being told, or something like that.
mm,
The word I have in my mind is iconoclast, which is, I don't know if you know,
mm,
the word is kind of like breaking down icons and saying,
mm.
actually no, it's something different.
I
I
mean, in a sense, I do that because in
mm,
the book, I say, like, why is this person famous, and a
yeah.
brief biography of them. But I think the way I pitched it, more than people generally know, but if you wanted more, you'd want to go and read a biography. For
Yeah.
example, Isaac Newton didn't discover gravity.
Mm.
That idea came about from René Descartes about 35 years prior.
Ah.
It was just Isaac Newton that put the mathematics to it. And
Ah.
another clever thing he did as well was, at the time, alchemy was considered a controversial practice, and anything that couldn't be explained was considered
Mm.
under that alchemy and was, as I said, very controversial. So the
Mm.
way he got around that was by saying, I'm doing is I'm showing how this works. I'm not trying to explain where it came from, not trying to think about its origins. I'm just using these equations to describe how it works.
Mm. Mm. Oh,
Even though he was
fascinating.
very interested in that whole field.
Yeah. Well, he's an amazing, amazing
Mm,
character, and I mean, I always think it's quite difficult diagnosing people
mm,
in the past. I don't know what you think about this, but I mean, I think I absolutely agree with you. I think they probably were autistic, but
mm,
we'll never really know for sure, will we? But the likelihood is
mm,
that they,
mm,
by the descriptions of them, that it sounds
mm,
pretty likely.
mm.
Um,
Yeah, so 2 points I make on that. Firstly,
yeah,
you can't diagnose someone posthumously
yeah, of course,
because they're not alive. You can't
yeah.
possibly sit them in
Hard
front of
enough
a
to get a
diagnostician.
diagnosis when you're alive.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep, that's one of the main criteria. You've got to be alive.
generally helps. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Secondly, as I said, autism, right, if the dictionary definition is autism is defined by the deficits a person displays in social situations. But there's a lot more to being a person, to being autistic, than exclusively how we behave or how we don't behave in social situations. And just me looking at these famous people from an autistic point of view, saying what I have in common with them, strictly speaking, I'm not trying to diagnose them.
No, no, absolutely not. No, no. I mean, I wasn't sort of suggesting that that, but it's
Mm,
interesting that there's a lot more of a sort of move towards positivity and
mm.
towards, saying, look what autism has achieved in the world. And I mean, is that the kind of main message you want to get across in the
That is
book?
the main, well, that's one of the main messages I want to get across. Yes, there is more to being autistic than our below average social skills, and use these examples of people in the past and present who have a lot in common with autistic people, who are showcasing the strengths that we can have if we are
Yeah.
given the right support. At the same time, I do admit with these characters, especially in childhood, some of the difficulties that they did face. I wouldn't want to deny that they may have struggled in social situations. And Alan Turing, the man credited with the invention of the modern day computer,
Yeah.
certainly struggled throughout his time at school and faced bullying, as did a number of other people throughout the book. But as I said, once they were able to receive the support, once they became an adult and had more experience of the world and were better able to understand it and find their place, then look at what they went on to achieve.
Absolutely. Turing's a great example.
Mm,
And I'm always curious about a lot of autistic people being LGBTQ plus.
mm,
And I think that seems to be quite sort of prevalent in our population, in that
mm,
we're sort of different from the mainstream in all sorts of
mm,
different ways, which
mm,
I find really interesting. I'm
mm.
just curious about your readers. I mean, who do you sort of think of people that you are writing for specifically, or do you just kind of write what you want to write? How do you approach
I
that?
definitely lean more toward what I want to write. Well, I mean, with It's Raining Cats and Dogs, it was an educational tool for me. Well, I
Yeah.
wanted to share that tool with the world. With A Different Kettle of Fish. Like I said, in 2014, there weren't nearly as many first-hand accounts of being autistic as they are today. So I wrote my own short story, Day in the Life of Being Autistic. And nowadays, one thing I have also thought about, which was in my mind throughout writing What Has Autism Ever Done for Us, is almost separating myself, who I am as a person, compared to being an autistic person. I mean, it's called the autism spectrum for a reason. It affects different people in different ways, and we have some skills and some areas that we need help with. Obviously, we've got a number of things in common. That's how we get diagnosed, but that's only one component of what makes me Michael Barton. That's just one part of what makes me who I am. As you said, I'm a musician. You don't need to be autistic or not to be a musician. I'm a judoka. You don't need to be autistic or not to do judo. Need to be very determined. Don't get me wrong. It is
Yeah.
a tough sport, martial art. But being autistic is almost doesn't really come into it, in my opinion. If you want to get good at judo, you just need to go. You need to train consistently and for a long time, and then you will get better at it.
Yeah, for sure. It certainly takes determination, though, doesn't it? And I think a lot of physical kinds of things and the stuff you do with rock climbing and that determination and physical strength, I think we can be quite sort of tenacious. That's my take on it. So when thinking about, it sounds like you've written mostly, from your perspective and thinking about the kind of things you'd like to say. What kind of feedback and things have you had? Kind of good reviews. What have you heard back from people?
The best reviews I get is when people say that I am inspirational. Like, I wish my son, my daughter could grow up like you. That certainly means a lot to me. And I just like to think I'm an example of when support is put into place and when it is done correctly, then
Yeah.
look at what that person can go on to achieve, not just being able to find their place in the world, but potentially achieving great things, as I suggest in What Has Autism Ever Done for Us. And in my case, it's not just showing the world like this is my journey, this could be the case for your autistic child as well, but also, like I said, I'm valuable in the world as a data analyst in my own right, in that sense, because
Yeah.
people readily admit that they're not very good at maths, which I find quite baffling personally. You don't get people admitting, oh, my social skills aren't great, oh, I can't read. That would sound ridiculous. That's how it sounds to me when
Yeah.
people say I can't do maths. It's like, well, that's just confusing
Yeah.
me. But either way, it's just the point of we need people who have the skills that autistic people have. And I think becoming and being a data analyst really fits into and plays to my strengths.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure. There's a lot of sort of pattern spotting that we're very good at, isn't it? And for me, I mean, being writer editor, I can look at a page at a glance and see errors and things like that. So it's sort of pattern spotting in data that can be really, really helpful, can't it? Brilliant. So you've had some really good feedback, people saying that you're really, you've inspired them and all those kinds of great things. When you're actually writing, what do you love and hate about writing, or do you have any feelings about it?
I mean, with writing a book, getting your ideas down on paper is sometimes really good to do, because you then, like, the way you think about things in your mind and the way that translates onto paper don't always add up to the same things. So it's that relationship between what's in your mind and what's on the page or on your screen if you work digitally. So, and obviously having a book, having some, well, metaphorical food for thought, but just something going on your brain, something to think about the next paragraph, the next chapter, the next idea, can be stimulating in a really good way when you're in that particular mood.
Yeah. So it's very sort of stimulating, it's very absorbing for you, and you kind of enjoy that. I guess we're kind of getting into that state of hyperfocus, perhaps, which some of us, access and for me, that's a real kind of bliss state when I'm writing.
Yeah, it's an
Is that
element of
something?
mindfulness. Yeah, when I first heard about the concept of mindfulness, I thought that
Yeah.
explains the hyperfocus well. It's just you exclusively focus on one thing so that your brain doesn't have capacity to worry about anything else. So if you've got no worries, it's all good, right? In that moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a state of, like I said, it's a state of bliss for a lot of people. But I think there are some people for whom writing is like pulling teeth, if you'll excuse another metaphor. It's pretty painful. It's about as fun as going to the dentist, but it's obviously something you enjoy.
It really depends on the person. I mean, it
Mm.
depends on your motivations, what you want to get out of it. If
Yeah.
you just want to write a book, if that's it, you're going to struggle. If you have an idea or a story or some kind of message you want to communicate out to people through the medium of a book,
Yeah.
then that not only gives you the motivation to do so, but really helps lay out the structure. With It's Raining Cats and Dogs, I knew it wanted to be a guide of idioms for autistic people living in a neurotypical world. For A Different Kettle of Fish, it was a day inside an autistic brain. For What Has Autism Ever Done for Us, it's looking at these famous people's lives, which people already know about, but looking at it from an autistic point of view. So having that structure, having that kind of foundation on which I build the ideas, put text and paragraphs and words down, I think is key to anyone looking to write a book.
Yeah.
Just saying, I want to write a book is going to get you stuck and without ideas and
Yeah, whole lot of mess and chaos. That's really interesting because it sounds like almost like a bit of a planning type thing, whether you plan in your head or on paper or whatever that might be, but having a single clear purpose and a bit of a structure in your head. Is that kind of how you think of
Yeah,
it?
that's how I have done it. Like this, I want this book to get this kind of theme out to people with certain messages and whatnot. I mean, this is a point at which I recommend. Sorry, another sales pitch.
Yeah, no,
This is
go
the
for it.
point I recommend reading my chapter on George Orwell in What Has Autism Ever Done for Us, especially when it comes to Animal Farm. It's a book many
Yeah.
people probably read as a child. If you haven't read it recently, I would certainly recommend you read it because as you grow up, your mind develops, you learn more, and then you look at the same story in a very different sense. I mean, certainly you think about the current political landscape and then you read Animal Farm. Some people may make links between the two. I don't want to put ideas in people's minds, but that's certainly what I thought. It's like, oh, it sounds a bit like Animal Farm. And there's even the adjective things being Orwellian when things start to lean towards that direction.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love that about language. I think it's so interesting because language is my particular passion, how language changes. So many of what you write about is interesting to me for those kinds of reasons. So um wonderful. So what's kind of next for you in your life? Have you got more books planned? What are you thinking of?
I mean, it only came out with What Has Autism Ever Done for Us 1 year ago. So I guess next stages would be, well, continuing to do more talks, appear on more podcasts, just getting my message out there, which I've already got. And also in the future, I mean, continuing to do some looking into possibly getting What Has Autism Ever Done for Us published by a actual publisher, because one of the benefits to being published, in my opinion, is that their reach is much further than I could ever hope to reach. I mean, they've got a marketing team working full time on getting the message out there, which is a lot more than I could ever do personally.
That's interesting. So do you notice a big difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing in that or other ways?
I mean, that's just my somewhat simplified view of it. If it gets published, then the publishers can do most of the work. They get the books out there. And even if you just sit there and do nothing, then you'll get royalties through every once in a while, even if it's not that much. You're still getting some money through, even if you don't do anything yourself. But obviously, if you do self-publish, which I will say it's easier than ever to do thanks to Amazon, which is how I self-published What Has Autism Ever Done for Us, then you do just get to keep a lot more of the money. And secondly, I said now it's on Amazon. I can tell people it's on Amazon and anyone can buy it anywhere in the world. When I first self-published It's Raining Cats and Dogs, it was literally you had to come through me as a person, and I'd have to physically ship it out to you.
Yeah.
Now Amazon does that for me.
Wow. Yes, so that's a big difference, isn't it? I mean, I
Mm,
know some traditional publishers. I have family who work in publishing, and they're not so keen on Amazon because they're so
mm,
big and they're quite
mm,
dominant and so on. But it's partly because they are so good at what they do.
mm,
They take away a lot of the stress for people, don't they? I think, not that I'm advertising
mm,
Amazon here, but there's
mm,
pros and cons to
mm,
different ways of doing it. So
mm.
brilliant. So what kind of things? How do you market your when you self publish? What kind of marketing do you do?
So for me, I guess it just kind of mostly grew organically over the years. Like I said, I've been talking about what it's like to be autistic since I was a teenager, and certainly looking up other autism events, whether online or in person now, can certainly help to get your reach out there. Like, this is Michael Barton. He talks about autism and neurodiversity, which is another
Yeah.
interesting point. Since neurodiversity became a buzzword over the past few years, I've
Yep.
put neurodiversity on my website, on my biography, so that anyone Googling neurodiversity speaker, I'm going to be somewhere on
Yep.
those Google results.
Yes. Yeah. So you've got to know a bit of the technical stuff, haven't you?
Mm,
You've got to have some kind of
mm,
understanding of search engine
mm.
optimization, SEO,
Yeah,
and things like that to do
I,
that kind of
I,
promotion, haven't you?
yeah, I do have
Yeah.
some understanding of SEO, having worked at a couple of different companies throughout my career as an analyst. So I have an understanding of SEO, and having my own personal website so that I can just put about myself, put in enough keywords, and just, yeah. I also have a just a form on my website that people can fill in. And alongside working full time as an analyst, at the moment I do get a number of people filling out my form and asking for the to give a talk or go on a podcast or whatever. And as I said, it's the kind of thing that I've built the foundations just gradually over a number of years.
Yeah.
That's how
Yeah.
I've done it.
So it's not kind of overnight success for a lot of people. That's what I hear. It's sort of
Yeah.
slow, drip, drip, drip
Mm.
kind of thing. But you're
That
but you're still very young, Michael. I mean, you're in,
mm,
looking at me, old lady, but you're in your 20s, I think, aren't you? So is
I'm
that right?
30 now.
You're in your 30. Gosh, you're looking very young. Good for those years. But it does take time. I mean, there are some people who
Mm.
seem to have very quick overnight success and have millions of followers
I
and all
mean,
that kind of stuff. And
statistically
great.
speaking, that can happen. I've heard somewhere
Yeah.
the way the YouTube algorithm works, when a video goes on, it gets fed to a number of random people. If a
Ah,
certain percentage of them watch it, then it goes to another cohort of people, then it's another
ah,
percentage, and it goes on and on. So like half of half of half of half and half, even if it's like
yeah.
1 in 10,000 chance you're going to go viral, if
Wow.
10,000 people do it, statistically speaking, someone is probably going to be an overnight success.
Yeah, of course. Statistically, it's going to happen, but it is such a sort of set of disciplines itself, and looking at
Mm.
social media and things like that. Do you do a lot of stuff on social media yourself?
I mean, I have accounts on Twitter and Instagram. I use LinkedIn as well as a like
Yeah,
analyst, as well as being a keynote speaker. So it is, again, I'd say from my experience, it's just the kind of thing to keep interacting with those platforms. You don't need to post multiple times a day, every day on LinkedIn, for example. It's just getting to know people, following people, and just put time into it. As I
yeah,
said, it doesn't need to be like spending an entire day on all of the platforms doing a load of posts. I think the social media platforms reward bit by bit consistently over a long period of time.
yeah. I think you're right, and I think it's understanding those kinds of algorithms and the way they
Mm,
work for people, because not everybody necessarily understands that. They think if you just put a
mm.
post out, then it's going to be fine. But it's kind of when it goes out and the words you're using and all those kinds of things, isn't it? Yeah. So there's a lot
As
to
well
think
as how
about.
much you interact with the platform as
Yeah,
well. As I said, if
exactly.
you interact with the platform, interact with other people, follow other people, etc.,
Yeah.
etc., and then it comes back to the statistics. Like, even if you put the best post in the world, it may only get a few likes. But if
Yeah.
you've gradually built up an audience, then send it out to this audience you've built up, it's going to be a lot more successful.
Yeah. And it's complex. I mean,
Mm,
I do some free writing workshops third Wednesday of every month, and we're doing one on marketing this month actually. So
mm,
which I will be sort of promoting, and I think it's not necessarily intuitive to
mm.
everybody to know all this kind of stuff. So it's, I'm hoping that that will help some people out there. Um, what kind of help did you get with writing your books? I mean, you went just kind of thinking about the writing support, because I'm thinking about what we do at Your Writing Partner. Um, what support did you get? You obviously got the publishers, Jessica Kingsley. Anybody
Yeah.
else or anything else that helped you along the way?
I mean, I guess as a teenager writing articles, it was peer reviewed by mum.
Yeah, yeah. Friends and family. Are they good critics, or what were they
No,
like?
I'd say they're
Oh,
good critics, absolutely. And obviously, got to put it out to my mum because, as I said, she was the one that arranged a lot of the support that I received as a child. And obviously, she approached the Autistic Trust to find out more about me. And now it's all come full circle, and I've been giving back to them, offering
nice.
advice and tips for other autistic people as well as other neurotypical people. It's not just autist. It's not just autistic people, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it sounds like you had some really good
Mm,
support from
mm,
home, which is
yeah,
amazing. And I think we all really need that. We need people
mm,
we know are in our corner,
mm,
and people looking at it. And you had professional
mm,
publishers as well.
mm.
Is there anything else you would have liked to kind of, looking back, if you think it would have been really helpful if anything you might have done differently?
Anything I might have done differently? I mean, I find that a difficult question to answer. Firstly, because I don't think much about the negatives of what's happened
Mm,
in the past. But I guess if I were to do things different, I mean, I would have, the main thing I would have done if I were to do things differently. Like if I wanted to make speaking and autism and neurodiversity speaking and being an author a full-time thing, I would do things differently. But that's then the only other alternative path I see. At the moment, I'm
yeah.
earning a living off working full-time as a data analyst. I live with my girlfriend and my dog. I have hobbies, like I said, judo and rock climbing, and as well as I said, having books and giving talks. So the only way I can see things would be different is if I decided to prioritize things differently in my life.
Yeah.
So it's not
Yeah.
that I don't have regrets as such. It's just if I prioritize things differently, things may well have worked out differently.
But it sounds like you're in a good place, happy with where you're at, and that's fantastic. Though it sounds like
Mm.
it's a kind of an add-on to your life, not your main focus kind of thing.
Yeah,
It's
that's right.
part of it, isn't it? Yeah, fantastic,
That's right.
wonderful. Well, I loved your books, and anything else you want to tell us about that? Things that exciting things that are coming up for you in the next weeks, months, years.
I mean, the next biggest thing for me is in June and July, we've got the autism show again. I know that
Yep.
I've heard on social media some people saying that they don't always like it, but it's run by a guy who runs an events company, and one of the events is the autism show. He has an autistic son and he listens to feedback over the years. So it's one of those shows that it gets better every year.
Yeah.
If you went a number of years ago and it wasn't ideal, well, I'd certainly say give it a go again. And what I
Mm,
think the biggest balance they have to strike is they want lots of people there, so it could be a successful event from a commercial point of view. But at the same time, if you've got too many people there, it can be too overwhelming for autistic people. So it really is
yeah.
finding the balance between those two. And they certainly have a number of accommodations in place already. So I'd say give it
Brilliant.
another go if you have had
Mm,
doubts in the past. But I've always loved the event. It's great to see people face to face and yeah, connect with
mm.
other people in the world of autism.
Excellent. So looking forward to going to that, and
Yeah,
we'll put links in our social media and so on about that, and
very much
um,
so.
we'll certainly be talking about that a lot. Fantastic. I think we're near the end, Michael. So I like to keep it fairly short and sweet, and keep it rolling along. But
Mm.
that That's brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. It was lovely talking with you. So thanks for listening to this podcast.
Well, thank you for
We
having me, Morwenna.
You're very, very welcome. We will share the info that Michael has mentioned on our podcast platforms, and do share the podcast with family, friends, and colleagues. And also check out your writing partner's new book, 5 Steps to Publish, which is published under my name. And until next time, thank you so much for listening.